The rifle barrel didn't waver. Elias Crow stood on his porch, one weathered hand steady on the Winchester, the other loose at his side. 6 armed men on horseback faced him through the driving snow. Behind him, through the cabin door, a terrified 5-year-old girl watched from the cellar shadows. "She's mine by law," the lead rider said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Got the documents right here." Elias spat into the snow. "You got forgeries and lies. Same thing you used on the last child, I'd wager." The rider's smile vanished. Before we begin this story of survival, sacrifice, and the single choice that changed 2 broken lives forever, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels across the world. The wind screamed across the Kansas prairie like something dying. Christmas Eve, 1872, and the storm had been building for 3 days straight, the kind of blizzard that buried cattle standing up, that turned familiar landmarks into white oblivion, that killed anyone fool enough to be caught outside without shelter. Elias Crow didn't care much about dying anymore. He sat in his cabin, alone like he'd been for 11 years, with a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table and a rifle across his knees. Not because he expected trouble. The rifle was just there, like it always was. Same as the whiskey. Same as the silence that filled every corner of the small ranch house like smoke. Outside, the storm hammered against the shutters. Snow piled against the north wall, drifting higher each hour. Elias poured another drink and watched the firelight dance across the walls, seeing ghosts in the shadows the way he always did this time of year. His wife's face, his son's laugh, both gone so long ago they felt like stories someone else had told him. He raised the glass. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind's howl. A weak, desperate scratching at the door. Then silence. Then a cry. Thin and broken, barely human. Elias froze, whiskey halfway to his lips. Another cry, weaker this time. "Hell," he muttered, setting down the glass and grabbing a lantern. Probably a wounded animal blown against the cabin by the storm. Coyote, maybe. Or a stray dog. He'd put it out of its misery and get back to his drinking. He threw open the door and the wind nearly ripped it from his hands. Snow blasted into the cabin, extinguishing half the fire. Elias raised the lantern, squinting into the white chaos. Nothing. Just the endless prairie being devoured by winter. He started to close the door. Then he looked down. A child lay crumpled in the snow at his feet. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, wearing nothing but a torn cotton dress, no coat, no shoes. Her bare feet were blue-black with frostbite, her lips the color of ash. Her eyes were open, staring up at him with a glazed, distant expression that said she'd already accepted death. "Jesus Christ," Elias breathed. He dropped the lantern and scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, just skin and bone and cold, so cold her body felt like frozen wood in his arms. He kicked the door shut behind him and carried her to the fire, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't in years. "Stay with me," he said, laying her on the rug in front of the hearth. "You hear me? Stay with me." No response. Her eyes tracked him, but there was no recognition in them, no hope. Elias stripped off his own coat and wrapped her in it, then threw more wood on the fire until it roared. He grabbed every blanket in the cabin and piled them over her shivering frame. Her feet, Christ, her feet looked like they'd been carved from purple ice. He'd seen frostbite before. Seen men lose toes, fingers, whole hands to the cold. This girl would be lucky if she kept both feet. He heated water and soaked rags, wrapping them gently around her frozen skin. She whimpered at his touch but didn't pull away, didn't fight, just lay there with those distant, broken eyes watching him like she couldn't quite believe he was real. "Where'd you come from?" Elias asked, working carefully. "How long you been out there?" Her lips moved. No sound came out. He leaned closer. "Say again?" "Days," she whispered. Her voice was like wind through dead grass. "Been walking for days." "Walking from where? Where's your family?" Her eyes closed. For a moment he thought he'd lost her, but then she drew a shuddering breath and opened them again. "No family," she said. "Not anymore." Elias felt something twist in his chest. He knew that emptiness in her voice. He'd heard it in his own for 11 years. He kept working on her feet, warming them slowly so the tissue wouldn't rupture. After a while, color started returning to them. Not much, but enough to give him hope she might keep all her toes. Her shivering gradually eased as her body temperature climbed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara." She paused. "Clara Vale. I'm Elias Crow. This is my ranch." He glanced toward the window where snow continued to pile against the glass. "You're safe now. Storm's not letting up anytime soon, but you're safe here." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Not crying exactly, just water spilling over, like her body didn't have the strength left for actual sobs. "Nobody's safe," she whispered. Before Elias could respond, her eyes rolled back and she went limp. He checked her pulse, still there, weak but steady. Exhaustion had finally claimed her. He sat back on his heels, studying the unconscious child. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds, ribs visible through her skin, arms covered in bruises, some fresh, some faded to yellow-green, burns on her wrists that looked like rope marks. This wasn't a child who'd simply gotten lost in a storm. This was a child who'd been running from something. Elias stood and walked to the window, staring out at the white hell beyond. Someone had done this to her. Someone had hurt her badly enough that she'd rather face a blizzard barefoot than stay with them. His hands clenched into fists. He returned to Clara's side and checked her breathing again. Still unconscious, but stable. He added another blanket and made sure the fire stayed high. Then he went to the kitchen and took stock of his supplies. Not much. He'd been living lean for months, planning to make a supply run that kept getting postponed because what was the point? Flour, some dried beans, half a side of salt pork, a few eggs from his 3 chickens. Coffee. Whiskey. That was it. Enough for one man to survive on for a few more weeks. Enough for a starving child and a man for maybe 5 days if they stretched it. Elias looked at the salt pork, then back at Clara. "Hell," he said again. He started cooking. Cut the pork into chunks, fried it with the last of his onions, scrambled the eggs, made a pot of weak coffee. By the time he finished, the cabin smelled like food for the first time in months. His own stomach growled. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a proper meal. But the food wasn't for him. Clara woke a few hours later. The sky outside had gone from white to black, the storm still raging. She sat up slowly, confused, her eyes darting around the cabin like a trapped animal searching for exits. "Easy," Elias said from the table. "You're all right." She spotted him and went very still, her whole body tensing. "I made food," he said, keeping his voice calm. "You should eat." Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, her eyes moved to the plate of food sitting on the hearth near her. Steam still rose from it. "That's for me?" Her voice was barely audible. "Unless you see someone else here." She looked at the food like it might disappear if she blinked. "Why?" The question hit Elias harder than it should have. "Because you're hungry. But you don't know me." "Don't need to know someone to feed them." Clara's face crumpled. She reached for the plate with shaking hands and took a bite of egg. Then another. Then she was eating like she hadn't seen food in weeks, which, Elias figured, she probably hadn't. He watched her eat everything on the plate, then drink the cup of water he'd left beside it. When she finished, she set the plate down carefully and looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "Thank you," she said. Elias nodded. "You want to tell me what happened to you?" Clara pulled the blankets tighter around herself. Outside, the wind howled. The fire popped and crackled. "My mama," she finally said. "She didn't want me no more." "What do you mean?" "She said I cost too much. Too much food, too much space, too much trouble." Clara's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Man came by one day. Had money. Mama took it and told me I belonged to him now." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "What man?" "Called himself Silas. Silas Boone." She shuddered. "He had mean eyes, and he smelled wrong, like something rotting." "Where'd he take you?" "Camp out near the river, maybe 2 days' ride from here. Had other men with him. They kept me in a wagon." Her hands twisted in the blanket. "I heard them talking one night about selling me to someone, about how much money I'd bring." "You ran?" Clara nodded. "3rd night. One of them got drunk and forgot to tie the rope tight. I waited till they were all asleep, then I just walked. Walked and walked. Got lost. Kept walking. Then the snow came and I couldn't feel my feet anymore, but I kept walking because I knew if I stopped, I'd die. How'd you find my ranch? Saw your light through the storm. Just a little orange glow in all that white. She looked at him. I thought maybe it was heaven. Thought maybe I died and was seeing something nice for once before everything went dark. Elias had to turn away. He walked to the window, staring at his own reflection in the dark glass. Behind him, Clara's reflection watched him back. You said there were other men with this Silas, he said. How many? 5, maybe 6. I didn't count good. They know where you went? Don't know. I tried to cover my tracks, but she trailed off. Storm probably covered them anyway. Elias nodded slowly. Maybe the girl was right. Maybe the blizzard had erased her trail completely. But men like the ones she described, men who traded in children, they didn't give up easy. They'd come looking, probably already were. He turned back to Clara. You can stay here long as you need. Storm will last another day, maybe 2. After that, we'll figure something out. You mean it? Her voice cracked. You're not going to send me back? Nobody's sending you anywhere. Claire's face did something complicated, relief and disbelief fighting for control. She'd probably been lied to so many times she couldn't recognize truth anymore. I can work, she said quickly. I can cook and clean and take care of animals. I don't eat much, I promise. I can... Clara, Elias held up a hand. You don't have to earn your keep. You're a child. Children shouldn't have to work for food and shelter. She blinked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. But everyone has to work, she said. That's what Mama always said. If you don't work, you don't deserve nothing. Your Mama was wrong. The words hung in the air between them. Clara stared at him, and for the first time since he'd found her, something besides fear and emptiness showed in her eyes. Something fragile and dangerous and desperately hopeful. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Go ahead. Are you going to hurt me? The question felt like a knife between his ribs. Elias looked at this tiny, broken child who'd been hurt so many times she expected it from everyone, and something in him, something he thought had died with his son, roared back to life. No, he said. His voice came out rough. I won't hurt you, ever. You got my word on that. Clara searched his face for a long time, then finally she nodded. Okay, she said. I believe you. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. Elias threw more wood on the fire. Clara curled up in her nest of blankets, her eyes drifting closed again. Just before she fell asleep, she spoke once more. Mr. Crow? Yeah? That food you gave me, was that all you had? Elias looked at the empty kitchen, then back at the sleeping child. I got plenty, he lied. Clara's eyes were already closed, but a small smile touched her lips, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Elias sat at the table, staring at his empty plate, his empty bottle, his empty life. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, for the first time in 11 years, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. He looked at Clara, sleeping peacefully by the fire, and thought about the son he'd lost. Thomas would have been about 15 now. Would have been tall and strong, probably. Would have taken over the ranch someday, married a local girl, given Elias grandchildren. But Thomas was gone. Had been gone since he was 4 years old, taken by fever in the same week that claimed Elias's wife. After that, Elias had closed himself off from the world, sold most of the cattle, let the fields go fallow, lived like a ghost haunting his own property. And now here was this girl, this stranger, this broken, terrified child who'd knocked on his door in the middle of a blizzard. Elias didn't believe in signs, didn't believe in fate or providence or second chances. He believed in cold reality and hard ground and the fact that most stories ended badly. But looking at Clara sleeping by his fire, warm and fed and safe, at least for now, he felt something he hadn't felt in over a decade. Purpose. The storm blew itself out 2 days later. Christmas morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The prairie transformed into an endless white desert. Elias woke before Clara and stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the frozen landscape. Beautiful and deadly. Like most things in this country. Behind him, Clara stirred. He heard her sit up, heard the blankets rustle. Morning, he said without turning around. Morning. Her voice was stronger now. 3 days of food and warmth had brought some life back into her. Storm's over. Yeah. Means the men can travel again. Elias turned to look at her. Clara sat wrapped in blankets, her dark hair tangled around her face, those two old eyes watching him carefully. You think they'll come, she said. Not a question. I think men who trade in children don't like losing their merchandise, Elias said. I think they'll come looking. Clara nodded slowly. What do we do? We. She'd said we. Elias walked to his gun cabinet and began checking his weapons. 2 rifles, a shotgun, 3 revolvers. Plenty of ammunition. He'd always kept his firearms clean and ready, even when he had nothing worth defending. We get ready, he said. And when they come, we don't let them take you. You'd fight for me? Clara's voice was small. You don't even know me. Elias looked at her. This child who'd been abandoned, sold, abused, and left to die in a blizzard. This child who expected nothing from the world because the world had given her nothing but pain. Don't need to know someone to do the right thing, he said. Claire's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she actually cried. Deep, gulping sobs that shook her whole body, 11 years of hurt pouring out all at once. Elias stood there awkwardly, rifle in his hands, having no idea what to do. He'd never been good with emotions, not even before he'd shut himself off from feeling anything at all. But Clara needed something from him, some kind of comfort he didn't know how to give. Finally, he set down the rifle and crossed to where she sat, knelt down beside her. It's all right, he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. You're safe here. Clara threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, crying like the child she was. Elias froze, every instinct telling him to pull away, to maintain distance, to protect himself from caring, but he didn't pull away. Slowly, carefully, he put his arms around her and held her while she cried. And for the first time since his wife and son died, Elias Crow allowed himself to feel something besides emptiness. They stayed like that for a long time. When Clara finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer, lighter somehow. Thank you, she whispered. Elias nodded and stood, uncomfortable with the gratitude. You hungry? Always. He almost smiled. Almost. They ate the last of the beans and salt pork for breakfast. Elias knew he'd have to make that supply run soon, whether he wanted to or not. Couldn't let the kids starve. After breakfast, Clara helped him tend the few animals he still kept. 3 chickens, a milk cow, 2 horses. She moved around the barn like she'd done farm work before, efficient despite her size and recent injuries. Your mama have a farm? Elias asked, watching her scatter feed for the chickens. Used to, before Pa died. After that, Mama couldn't keep it going. We moved to town. Clara's voice was matter-of-fact. Mama started drinking, started bringing home different men, started forgetting she had a daughter. That when Silas showed up? Yeah, he came by the boarding house where we were staying. Said he was looking for someone to help with his camp. Said he'd pay good money. Clara scattered more feed, not looking at Elias. Mama didn't even ask what kind of work. She just took the money and told me to go with him. Did she know what Silas really wanted? Clara was quiet for a long moment. I think she knew. I think she just didn't care. Elias felt that twist in his chest again. Wanted to say something comforting, something wise. But what comfort was there for a child whose own mother had sold her? Well, he said finally, she was wrong and stupid, and you deserved better. Clara looked up at him, surprise in her eyes. You really think that? I know it. They finished the chores in silence. As they walked back to the cabin, Clara slipped her small hand into Elias's rough, calloused one. He looked down at their joined hands, startled. Is this okay? Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. Mama used to say I was too clingy. Elias thought about pulling away, thought about maintaining boundaries, thought about protecting himself. Then he squeezed her hand gently. It's fine. They were halfway to the cabin when Elias spotted the rider approaching from the east. He stopped, his hand tightening on Clara's. Get inside. Hide in the cellar. Don't come out till I say so. Clara's face went white. Is it them? Don't know yet, but better safe. He looked down at her. Go, now. Clara ran for the cabin. Elias watched her disappear inside, then turned to face the approaching rider. He walked to the porch and grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall, checking the load out of habit. The rider came closer. A single man on a gray horse, wearing a sheriff's star on his coat. Elias relaxed slightly but kept the rifle ready. He'd known Sheriff Gideon Ward for 20 years. Knew him to be a decent man, if unimaginative. Ward handled the usual problems: drunk cowboys, land disputes, the occasional horse thief. Not much else happened in their quiet corner of Kansas. Ward reined in his horse at the edge of the property. Elias. Sheriff. Mind if I come closer? Got something to discuss? Elias nodded. Ward rode up to the porch and dismounted, his breath clouding in the cold air. Hell of a storm, Ward said. Seen worse. I expect you have. Ward looked uncomfortable. Listen, Elias, I need to ask you something. You seen a child around here? Little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old? Elias kept his face neutral. Why? Got some men staying at the boarding house in town. Came in yesterday morning right after the storm cleared. Said they lost a child during the blizzard. Been searching the area for her. Lost her how? Ward shifted his weight. They say she ran off, scared of the storm, I guess. They've been looking for 2 days now. These men give their names? Leader calls himself Silas Boone. Says the child's his ward, got papers and everything. Elias felt ice in his veins. What kind of papers? Custody documents, signed by the girl's mother. Ward pulled out his hat and ran a hand through his graying hair. Look, Elias, I know you keep to yourself out here, but if you've seen anything, I need to know. These men are worried sick. I bet they are. Ward caught the tone. What's that supposed to mean? How much do you know about these men, Gideon? Just what they told me. Boone runs a freight operation. Says he took the girl in after her mother couldn't care for her no more. Says he's been raising her proper. And you believed him. I got no reason not to. He's got legal documents. Elias stared at the sheriff for a long moment. Papers can be forged. You saying they are? I'm saying you should look closer before you help these men find anything. Ward's eyes narrowed. You know something I don't? Maybe. Elias, if that child's out here, she's safe. The admission hung in the air between them. Ward's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. She's here? He said carefully. She showed up during the storm. Half dead, barefoot, covered in bruises and rope burns. Elias's voice was cold. That sound like a child running from a worried guardian, or a child running from something worse? Ward looked troubled. Bruises could have come from anywhere. Storm was... Don't, Elias said flatly. Don't make excuses. You've been sheriff long enough to know what you're looking at. What I'm looking at is a custody dispute, and the law says I can protect someone on my property if I think they're in danger. The law also says you can't harbor someone else's legal ward. Even if that ward was bought and paid for like property? Ward went very still. What? Girl told me her mama sold her, took money from Boone and handed her over like she was livestock. Elias kept his rifle pointed at the ground, but his grip stayed firm. That legal in your book, Sheriff? That's a serious accusation. And I'm making it seriously. Ward was quiet for a long time, staring at Elias's cabin. I need to talk to the girl, get her side of things. No. Elias, she's been through enough. I'm not handing her over to scare her more. I'm not talking about handing her over. I'm talking about doing my job. Ward's voice hardened. I need to hear what she has to say. Then I can make a proper determination. Elias considered this. Ward was right. If Clara told her story to the law, it might protect her better than anything Elias could do alone. But it also meant putting her in front of strangers again, making her relive trauma, trusting a system that had already failed her once. She's scared, Elias said finally. Real scared. You come in here with demands and a badge, she'll shut down. Then you be there. Make sure she feels safe. Ward met his eyes. I'm not the enemy here, Elias. I want to help. But I need to know what's really happening. Elias studied the sheriff's face, looking for deception, found only tired sincerity. All right, he said, but you leave your gun on your horse, and you keep your voice calm. First sign she's too scared to continue, we stop. Understood? Understood. Ward removed his gun belt and hung it on his saddle. Then he followed Elias into the cabin, stomping snow off his boots at the door. Clara, Elias called. You can come up. It's safe. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cellar door creaked open and Clara's pale face appeared in the gap. Her eyes went immediately to Ward, and Elias saw her whole body tense. This is Sheriff Ward, Elias said gently. He needs to ask you some questions. I'll be right here the whole time, okay? Clara climbed out of the cellar slowly, keeping Elias between herself and the stranger. Ward crouched down to her level, making himself smaller, less threatening. Hello, Clara, he said softly. My name's Gideon. I'm not here to hurt you or scare you. I just want to hear what happened. Can you do that for me? Clara looked at Elias. He nodded. Okay, she whispered. Ward asked his questions carefully. Where'd she come from? Who was taking care of her before? How did she end up at Elias's ranch? Clara answered in a voice so quiet Ward had to lean in to hear, but she answered truthfully. Told him about her mother, about Silas, about the camp and the wagon and the men who talked about selling her. Ward's face grew grimmer with each revelation. These men, he said. You remember any of their names besides Silas? Clara thought hard. There was one called Dutch, and another one they called Preacher, but he didn't seem like no preacher to me. Would you recognize them if you saw them again? Clara nodded, then looked at Elias with sudden fear. Are you going to make me go back? No, Elias said firmly before Ward could respond. Ward shot him a look but didn't contradict him. Instead, he turned back to Clara. Honey, I need to ask you something important. Those papers Silas showed me, did your mama really sign them? I don't know, Clara said. I can't read so good. But Mama did tell me I belong to Silas now. She said it more than once. Ward stood slowly, his knees popping. He looked at Elias with an expression somewhere between respect and frustration. This is a mess, he said quietly. What are you going to do? I need to talk to Judge Whitaker, get his read on the situation. Ward headed for the door, then stopped. Elias, those men are going to come looking. Papers or no papers, they're not going to give up easy. Let them come. There's 6 of them, maybe more. I said let them come. Ward studied him for a long moment. You've been holed up out here for years, drinking yourself to death. Now suddenly you're ready to fight 6 men over a child you met 3 days ago? Guess so. Why? Elias looked at Clara, who watched him with those 2 old eyes. Eyes that had seen too much darkness. Eyes that deserved to see something better. Because someone has to, he said. Ward left shortly after, promising to speak with the judge and return with guidance. Elias watched him right away, then checked his weapons again. If Silas and his men came before Ward got back, Elias needed to be ready. Clara sat by the fire, quiet. After a while, she spoke. Mr. Crow? Yeah? Are you scared? Elias looked at his hands. Hands that had held his dying son. Hands that had buried his wife. Hands that had spent 11 years doing nothing of value. No, he said honestly. I got nothing left to lose. But you could get hurt. You could die. Could. Probably won't, though. Clara was quiet again. Then, I don't want you to die. Something in Elias's chest cracked open. He crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her, looking into her young, frightened face. I'm not planning on it, he said. But Clara, you need to understand something. If those men come and if things go bad, you run. You hear me? You don't wait. You don't look back. You just run. Where would I go? Sheriff's office in town, Judge Whitaker's house, anywhere but here. He gripped her shoulders gently. Promise me. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to leave you. Promise me anyway. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, I promise. Elias nodded and released her. He went back to the window, scanning the white prairie for movement. They came the next morning. Elias saw them when they were still a mile out, 6 dark shapes moving across the white prairie like a bruise spreading across clean skin. He'd been up since before dawn, watching from the window with a cup of cold coffee in one hand and his Winchester in the other. They're coming, he said. Clara was already in the cellar. She'd gone down without being asked, without arguing. Smart kid, scared, but smart. Elias set down the coffee and checked his rifle one more time. Fully loaded. He had 2 more rifles leaning against the wall beside the door, the shotgun on the table, and 3 revolvers within easy reach. Probably overkill for 6 men, but he'd learned a long time ago that probably wasn't good enough when lives were at stake. He watched the riders approach. They came slowly, deliberately, spread out in a loose line like they were herding cattle. Professional. These weren't just random drifters, they moved like men who'd done this kind of thing before. When they got within 100 yards, Elias stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit him like a fist, but he didn't flinch, didn't reach for his coat. Let them see him standing there with his rifle, ready. The riders stopped about 50 feet from the cabin. The man in the center urged his horse forward a few more paces. He was tall, thin as a fence post, with a beard that looked like it had never seen a barber, and eyes that reminded Elias of a snake sizing up a mouse. "You must be Elias Crow," the man said. His voice was smooth, almost friendly. That made Elias trust him less. "And you must be Silas Boone." "I am indeed." Silas smiled, showing teeth that were surprisingly white in his weathered face. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Don't have anything that belongs to you. Now, Mr. Crow, let's not be difficult. A little girl ran away from my camp during the storm. I have reason to believe she ended up here." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I have legal custody of the child, signed documents from her mother, all proper and legal. Let me see them." Silas nudged his horse closer. Elias raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it at anyone, just making sure it was visible. Silas stopped, still smiling. "Perhaps you could lower that weapon," Silas said. "We're all civilized men here. I'll lower it when you turn around and ride back to wherever you came from." The smile stayed fixed on Silas's face, but something changed in his eyes, something cold and reptilian. "Mr. Crow, I understand you're a solitary man, lived out here alone for many years. Perhaps you've forgotten how the law works." He held up the paper. "This document gives me legal custody of Clara Vale. By keeping her here, you're breaking the law." "Funny thing about laws," Elias said. "They're supposed to protect people, especially children. Documents don't mean much when the child in question shows up half dead, covered in bruises, scared out of her mind. The child is disturbed. Her mother warned me she tells stories." "She tell you a story about the rope burns on her wrists?" Silas's smile finally faded. "The child is unruly. Sometimes restraints are necessary for her own safety." "For a 5-year-old? For a 5-year-old who runs away in blizzards, yes." Silas's voice hardened. "Now I've been patient, Mr. Crow, but my patience is running thin. Give me the girl and we'll be on our way." "No." One of the other riders spoke up, a thick-necked man with a scar across his cheek. "Maybe we just go in and get her ourselves." Elias swung the rifle toward him, not quite aiming, but close. "Maybe you try and see how that works out for you." The scarred man reached for his gun. Elias cocked the Winchester, the sound sharp in the cold air. "Easy," Silas said, holding up a hand. The scarred man froze. Silas turned back to Elias. "You're one man. We're 6. Even if you get 1 or 2 of us, the rest will kill you. Then we'll take the girl anyway. Is that really how you want this to end?" "I've been alive 63 years, Elias said. "Most of them haven't been worth much. But keeping you bastards from getting that child, that'd make the whole thing worthwhile." Something like respect flickered across Silas's face. Or maybe it was just the cold wind making his eyes water. "You're a fool," Silas said. "Been called worse." They stared at each other across the snow. The other riders shifted in their saddles, hands near their weapons. Elias could feel the violence building in the air like static before a lightning strike. Then from the east, another rider appeared. Everyone turned to look. The newcomer came fast, his horse kicking up snow. And as he got closer, Elias recognized Sheriff Ward's gray mare. Ward reined in hard between Elias's porch and the line of riders. "What's going on here?" Ward's voice carried authority, but also wariness. He was one lawman facing 6 armed men and a rancher who might or might not be on his side. "Sheriff," Silas said smoothly, his smile returning. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to Mr. Crow that he needs to return my ward to me." "Your ward?" Ward repeated. He looked at Elias. "You got the girl here?" "I do." "And you're refusing to turn her over?" "I am." Ward sighed. Elias, I spoke with Judge Whitaker. He wants to see the girl and the documents before he makes any ruling. Says everyone needs to come to town for a proper hearing. When? Elias asked. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Ward looked at Silas. That acceptable to you, Mr. Boone? Silas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Perfectly acceptable, as long as the child is secured until then. She'll be secured, Ward said. In the jail, for her own protection. Absolutely not, Elias said. Now hold on. She's not spending the night in a cell like a criminal. I'm not suggesting she's a criminal, Ward said, frustration creeping into his voice. I'm suggesting it's the safest place until the judge can sort this out. The safest place is right here. With 6 men who want to take her camped outside your property? Ward gestured at Silas and his riders. How safe is that? Elias had to admit the sheriff had a point. He looked at Silas, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. I'll tell you what, Ward said. Clara can stay at my house. My wife will look after her. You can stay there too if you want, Elias. Keep an eye on things. He turned to Silas. And you and your men can get rooms at the boarding house. Tomorrow we sort this out legal and proper. Agreed? Nobody moved for a long moment. Agreed, Silas finally said. But I want assurances the child won't be allowed to run away again. My house has locks, Ward said dryly, and my wife Martha is meaner than she looks. The girl won't go anywhere. Elias wanted to argue more, but he could see Ward was trying to find a middle ground, trying to prevent bloodshed right here in the snow. And maybe the sheriff was right. Maybe having the law involved, having everything done proper, would protect Clara better than Elias's rifle. Or maybe it would just make it easier for Silas to take her legally. All right, Elias said, we'll come to town. Silas smiled again. Excellent. Sheriff, I trust you'll ensure Mr. Crow doesn't try anything foolish before tomorrow's hearing. I trust Mr. Crow will behave himself, Ward said. Same as I trust you and your men will stay away from my house tonight. Clear? Crystal. The riders turned and headed east toward town. Elias watched them go, his finger still near the trigger of his rifle. You think that was smart? He asked Ward when they were out of earshot. I think it was smarter than a gunfight that gets you killed and leaves that little girl with nobody. Ward dismounted and tied his horse. Now go get her. We need to leave before dark. Elias went inside and called down to the cellar. Clara, it's safe. She emerged slowly, her face pale. Are they gone? For now. We're going to town with the sheriff. There's going to be a hearing tomorrow. A hearing? Judge is going to decide what happens to you. Clara's eyes went wide with fear. They're going to give me back to Silas. Not if I can help it. But you heard what he said. He has papers, legal papers. Papers can be challenged. Elias crouched down to her level. Clara, I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that? She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Will you be there at the hearing? Every second of it. Okay. She took a shaky breath. Oh, okay. They gathered what little they needed and rode to town in silence. Clara sat in front of Elias on his horse, small and tense against his chest. Ward led the way, glancing back occasionally to make sure they were following. The town wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a boarding house, a church, a doctor's office, and the sheriff's office with 2 cells in the back. Ward's house sat at the edge of town, a modest frame building with smoke coming from the chimney. Martha Ward met them at the door. She was a plump woman with iron gray hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Clara and her expression softened. Poor thing, she murmured. Come in, child. Let's get you warmed up. Clara hesitated, looking back at Elias. It's all right, he said. Mrs. Ward is good people. Martha led Clara inside. Ward gestured for Elias to follow him to the kitchen. Coffee? Ward asked. Whiskey would be better. Fresh out. Ward poured 2 cups of coffee anyway. Elias, I need you to understand something. That hearing tomorrow, it might not go the way you want. Because of the papers. Because of the papers, yes. And because the law tends to favor documented custody over a stranger who happened to find the child. Ward sat down heavily. I believe her story. I do. But believing and proving are different things. So what do I do? You tell the truth. You tell the judge what you saw, what Clara told you, and you hope it's enough. Ward paused. And you prepare yourself for the possibility that it won't be. Elias stared into his coffee. If the judge gives her back to Silas, I'm not letting her go. Then you'll be breaking the law. Wouldn't be the first law I broke. Ward leaned forward. Listen to me. You go against a judge's ruling, you become a fugitive. They'll hunt you down. And when they catch you, and they will catch you, Clara goes back to Silas anyway, and you go to prison, or get yourself killed. Is that what you want? I want that child safe. Then let the law work. The law sold her in the first place. Ward had no answer to that. They sat in silence, drinking bad coffee and listening to the sound of Martha's voice in the other room, gentle and reassuring. After a while, Clara appeared in the doorway. Mr. Crow? Her voice was small. Mrs. Ward says I should sleep, but I wanted to say good night. Elias stood. Good night, Clara. She crossed the kitchen and hugged him suddenly, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. He stood there awkwardly, then patted her back. It's going to be all right, he said, hoping it wasn't a lie. You promise? He couldn't promise that. Couldn't promise anything except that he'd try. I promise I won't give up, he said instead. Clara nodded against his chest, then let go and followed Martha upstairs. Elias watched her go, feeling something twist in his gut. You care about that child, Ward observed. Don't know her well enough to care. That's horseshit, and you know it. Elias looked at the sheriff. 3 days ago, I was ready to drink myself to death. Didn't care about anything or anyone. Then she showed up, and suddenly I got something worth protecting again. He shook his head. Don't make sense even to me. Makes perfect sense, Ward said quietly. You lost a son once. Maybe you see a chance to save someone else's child. Make up for what you couldn't do back then. Can't make up for that? No. But you can try to do better going forward. They talked a while longer, then Ward showed Elias to a spare room. Elias lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, sleep nowhere near him. He could hear Martha and Clara talking in the next room, their voices muffled through the wall. Around midnight, he heard Clara crying, quiet, muffled sobs that she was clearly trying to hide. He got up and went to her door, raising his hand to knock, then stopping. What could he say? What comfort could he offer that wouldn't be a lie? He stood there for a long time, listening to her cry herself to sleep, and felt more helpless than he'd felt in years. Morning came too fast. Elias woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. He went downstairs to find Martha cooking breakfast while Clara sat at the table, picking at a biscuit. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Morning, Elias said. Clara looked up. Is it time? Soon. They ate in near silence. Martha tried to make conversation, but it fell flat. Ward came in halfway through, already wearing his gun belt and badge. Judge wants everyone there by 10, he said. Silas and his men are already waiting. Good, Elias said. Let them wait. At 9:45, they walked to the courthouse, a grandiose name for a single room above the general store. Judge Harland Whitaker presided over cases once a month when he rode out from Topeka, and everyone else had to work around his schedule. Silas and his 5 men stood outside the courthouse. They all straightened when they saw Clara, their eyes following her like wolves watching a rabbit. Elias positioned himself between them and the girl. Gentlemen, Silas said pleasantly. Shall we? The courtroom was already full. News traveled fast in small towns, and a custody dispute involving a mysterious child was the most exciting thing that had happened in months. People packed the benches, whispering among themselves. Judge Whitaker sat behind a scarred oak desk, looking like an irritated bulldog. He was 60, bald, with spectacular white mutton chops and a reputation for not suffering fools. All right, he said as everyone settled in. Let's get this over with. Mr. Boone, you're claiming custody of this child? I am, Your Honor. Silas stood, producing his papers. I have signed documents from the child's mother granting me legal guardianship. Whitaker examined the papers, squinting through wire-rimmed glasses. These appear to be in order, signed and witnessed. They're forged, Elias said. Whitaker looked at him. You have proof of that? No, but... Then keep your speculation to yourself. The judge turned back to Silas. On what grounds did the mother surrender custody? She was unable to care for the child, Your Honor. Destitute, no means of support. I offered to take the girl in out of Christian charity. Several people in the courtroom nodded approvingly. Elias wanted to punch something. And you, Mr. Crow, Whitaker continued. What's your interest in this matter? Elias stood. The child showed up at my ranch during the storm. She was half dead, covered in bruises, terrified. She told me Mr. Boone and his men were planning to sell her. A murmur went through the courtroom. Silas's face remained calm, but his eyes flashed with anger. That's a serious accusation, Whitaker said. It's a damn lie, Silas said. The child is troubled, Your Honor, prone to fantasy and stories. Her mother warned me about it. The bruises aren't fantasy, Elias said. The rope burns on her wrists aren't fantasy. The child is unruly, Silas repeated. Sometimes restraint is necessary. She's 5 years old. She's dangerous to herself. She ran away from you in a blizzard barefoot. That tell you something about how she feels about your care? Whitaker raised a hand. Enough. I want to hear from the child herself. He looked at Clara, who had been sitting silently beside Elias. Young lady, come here. Clara stood on trembling legs. Elias wanted to go with her, but Whitaker gestured for him to sit down. Clara walked to the judge's desk alone, looking impossibly small. What's your name? Whitaker asked gently. Clara Vale, sir. Clara, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you run away from Mr. Boone? Clara nodded. Why? She looked at Silas, who was staring at her with those snake eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. He was going to sell me. Speak up, child. He was going to sell me, Clara repeated, louder. I heard him and the other men talking about it, about how much money I'd bring. That's nonsense, Silas said. Your Honor, the child is clearly— I'm not done, Whitaker snapped. He turned back to Clara. Did Mr. Boone ever hurt you? Clara hesitated. Elias could see her weighing whether to tell the truth, whether anyone would believe her. Yes, she finally said. He hit me when I wouldn't do what he said, and he tied me up in the wagon so I couldn't run away. The restraints were for her safety, Silas insisted. Did your mother really give you to Mr. Boone? Whitaker asked. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Yes, sir. She took his money and told me I belonged to him now. And you ran away because you were afraid of him. Yes, sir. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, studying Clara, then Silas, then Elias. The courtroom was completely silent. Mr. Boone, the judge finally said, these are troubling allegations. I'm inclined to keep the child in protective custody until we can investigate further. Your Honor, I have legal documents, which may or may not be legitimate. I'm ordering you to produce the child's mother for testimony. Until then, Clara will remain in Sheriff Ward's care. Silas's calm facade finally cracked. This is outrageous. I have rights, and so does that child. Court adjourned. Whitaker stood and left through the back door before Silas could protest further. The courtroom erupted in conversation. Elias went to Clara and put a hand on her shoulder. You did good, he said. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Is it over? Not yet, but it's a start. Silas approached them, his men flanking him. Ward stepped between them immediately, hand on his gun. Back off, the sheriff said. Silas ignored him, his eyes on Clara. This isn't over, little girl, not by a long shot. That's enough, Ward said. Get out of here before I arrest you for threatening a witness. Silas smiled, that same cold reptilian smile. Of course, Sheriff. We'll be at the boarding house if you need us. He and his men left. Elias watched them go, that bad feeling in his gut getting worse. What now? He asked Ward. Now we find the mother. Get her testimony. Ward looked troubled. But that could take weeks, and in the meantime, Silas isn't going to sit around and wait. You think he'll try something? I think he's a man who doesn't like losing. Yeah, I think he'll try something. They went back to Ward's house. Martha made lunch, but nobody had much appetite. Clara sat by the window, staring out at the street, watching for threats. She can't live like this, Martha said quietly to Elias, looking over her shoulder every minute. I know. What are you going to do? Whatever I have to. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen with Ward's spare rifle across his knees, watching the street. Around 2 a.m, he saw movement. 3 figures creeping toward the house from different directions. He stood and went to Ward's room. "Sheriff, we got company." Ward was up instantly, grabbing his gun. "How many?" "3 that I saw, probably more." They woke Martha and had her take Clara to the cellar. Then they positioned themselves at different windows, watching the shadows close in. A window shattered upstairs. Ward fired in that direction and someone cursed in the darkness. Glass broke in the kitchen. Elias swung his rifle toward the sound but held his fire. He couldn't see a clear target. "Give us the girl," Silas's voice called from outside. "Nobody else has to get hurt." "Not happening," Ward shouted back. "Then you're making a mistake." More gunfire erupted. A bullet punched through the kitchen wall inches from Elias's head. He dropped and fired blind through the window, heard someone yelp. This went on for several minutes, shadowy figures darting between buildings, gunfire crackling in the night. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell over the street. "They're gone," Ward said, peering carefully through his window. "We're waiting for us to show ourselves." Elias went to the cellar door. "Clara? Martha? You all right?" "We're fine," Martha called back. "What happened?" "They tried to take her. Didn't work." But this wasn't over. Silas had made his move and failed, which meant he'd be even more desperate next time. Ward seemed to be thinking the same thing. "We can't stay here. Not safe anymore." "Where do we go?" "I don't know, but we need to figure it out before they try again." Elias looked at the broken windows, the bullet holes in the walls. Clara couldn't stay here. The whole town knew where she was now. Silas could come back with more men, could wait them out, could find 100 ways to get to her. There was only one solution Elias could see. "We leave," he said. "Tonight. Get her somewhere safe until this gets sorted out." "Where?" Ward asked. "You take her on the run, you become a fugitive. They'll hunt you." "Let them try." Ward stared at him. "You're serious. Dead serious. Elias, if you run with that child, I'm not running, I'm protecting her. There's a difference." From the cellar, Claire's voice called up, "Mr. Crow, what's happening?" Elias looked at Ward. "You going to try and stop me?" The sheriff was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. "I should," he said, "but I won't. Just be careful. And when this is over, you come back and face the judge proper. Understood?" "Understood." Elias went down to the cellar. Clara and Martha looked up at him in the lamplight. "Get your things," he told Clara. "We're leaving." They left in the darkest part of night, when even the saloon had gone quiet and the streets lay empty under a thin slice of moon. Elias had Clara bundled in blankets on his horse, her small body pressed against his chest. Ward had given them supplies, jerky, hardtack, a canteen, and promised to buy them time however he could. "Where are we going?" Clara whispered as they rode out of town. "Somewhere safe." "Where's that?" Elias didn't have an answer. Every town within 3 days' ride was too close, too obvious. Silas would check them all. The ranch was out. That would be the first place they'd look. He needed somewhere remote, somewhere unexpected. The abandoned line shack up in the hills near Cottonwood Creek. He'd used it years ago when running cattle. Nobody went up there anymore, not since the hard winter of '68 killed off most of the herds in that area. It wasn't much, 4 walls and a roof that probably leaked, but it would do. They rode through what was left of the night, Clara dozing fitfully against him. When dawn broke gray and cold over the prairie, they were 10 miles from town and climbing into rougher country. Stands of cottonwood marked where creeks ran, their bare branches black against the pale sky. Elias kept watching their back trail. No sign of pursuit yet, but that didn't mean much. Silas would notice Clara was gone by morning, would raise hell with Ward. The sheriff could probably stall him a few hours, claim he didn't know where they'd gone, but eventually Silas would start searching. "I'm hungry," Clara said, around mid-morning. Elias stopped the horse and helped her down. They sat in a grove of cottonwoods while she ate jerky and drank from the canteen. Her hands were shaking. "You cold?" he asked. "No, just scared." "Yeah, me too." Clara looked at him in surprise. "You're scared?" "Would be stupid not to be. But you're so brave." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Just means you do what needs doing anyway." Elias scanned the horizon again, still clear. "We'll be at the line shack by nightfall. You can rest proper then." They rode on. The land grew rougher, rockier. Hills rose around them, covered in scrub brush and scattered pines. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. Elias watched it spiral against the gray sky and thought about predators, about how they never gave up once they'd marked their prey. Around noon, they crossed Cottonwood Creek, the horse picking its way carefully over the frozen rocks. On the far side, the trail narrowed to barely more than a game path winding up into the hills. That's when Elias heard the shot. The bullet cracked past his head close enough that he felt the air move. He yanked the horse sideways and dropped from the saddle, pulling Clara down with him. They hit the ground hard behind a fallen log, just as a second shot splintered bark above them. "Stay down," Elias hissed. He had his rifle in his hand, searching for the shooter. Movement in the rocks above them, maybe 200 yards up the hillside. A man with a rifle, working the bolt for another shot. Elias recognized him even at this distance. The scarred man from Silas's crew. The one called Dutch. Elias fired, missed. Dutch ducked behind a boulder and returned fire. 3 quick shots that kicked up dirt and snow around the log. Clara pressed herself flat, hands over her ears. "How'd they find us?" she gasped. Good question. Elias had been careful, had taken a route he didn't think anyone could predict, unless Dutch hadn't found them at all, unless he'd just gotten lucky, camping along the creek and spotting them crossing, or unless someone had told Silas which way they'd gone. No time to think about that now. Dutch was repositioning, moving to get a better angle. Elias grabbed Clara. "We're going to run for those trees. When I say go, you run as fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back. Understand?" Clara nodded, her face white. "Go!" They broke from cover. Elias fired twice toward Dutch's position without aiming, just trying to make him keep his head down. Clara ran for the tree line 20 yards away, stumbling in the snow. Another shot cracked out. Elias felt something tug at his coat but didn't slow down. They made the trees, dense pines that offered cover and concealment. Elias pushed Clara behind a thick trunk and turned to face the hillside. Dutch was coming down now, moving from rock to rock with the confidence of a man who thought he had his targets trapped. Elias aimed carefully this time. Waited. Dutch exposed himself for just a second, moving between boulders. Elias fired. Dutch went down hard, clutching his leg. His rifle clattered on the rocks. He tried to crawl toward it, but Elias fired again, kicking up snow inches from his hand. Dutch froze. "Don't move," Elias shouted. He worked his way up the hillside, keeping his rifle trained on Dutch. The man lay on his side, blood spreading dark across his pants leg. His face was twisted with pain and rage. "You shot me, you bastard!" Dutch gasped. "You shot at a child. I should have aimed higher." Elias kicked Dutch's rifle away. "How'd you know we'd come this way?" "Lucky guess." Elias pressed the muzzle of his rifle against Dutch's wounded leg. The man screamed. "Try again." All right. Dutch's face was slick with sweat despite the cold. "Silas figured you'd run. Sent all of us out to watch the roads and trails. I drew the short straw and got stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. Just you? Or are there others nearby?" "Just me. The others are covering the main routes to Topeka and Junction City." Dutch grimaced. "Should have known you'd be too smart to take the obvious way." Elias stepped back, thinking. If Dutch was telling the truth, and he probably was given the circumstances, then the others were all watching the wrong places. That bought Elias time. "Where's Silas now?" "Still in town, last I saw. Probably raising hell with that sheriff by now." "The girl's mother. Silas know where she is?" Dutch laughed, a bitter sound. "Her. She's long gone. Took Silas's money and headed west the same day she sold the brat. Probably in California by now if she didn't drink herself to death first." Clara had come up behind Elias. She'd heard everything. Her face was completely blank, carefully empty. Elias recognized that look. The one people got when hearing something that hurt too much to feel all at once. "She's really gone," Clara said quietly. "She's not coming back." "Doesn't look like it," Elias said. "Good." Clara's voice was flat. "I don't want her to come back." Dutch spat blood. "Touching. Now what? You gonna kill me?" Elias considered it. Would be easier, wouldn't it? One less man hunting them, one less witness to where they'd gone. He'd killed men before, during the war and after. It wasn't something that bothered him particularly. But doing it in front of Clara was different. No, he said finally. You're going to tell me something first. You said you heard Silas and the others talking about selling Clara. Who to? Who was buying? Dutch's eyes shifted. I don't know what you're talking about. Elias aimed at his other leg. Wait, wait! Dutch held up his hands. I don't know names, all right? Just that Silas has connections. People who pay good money for kids. Girls especially. What people? Rich folks, mostly. Men who want servants, workers, whatever. Dutch's expression turned ugly. Use your imagination. Elias felt sick. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Clara wasn't the first, he said. Hell no. Silas has been running this game for years. Finds desperate mothers, buys their kids with forged papers, sells them to the highest bidder. Dutch grimaced against the pain. The little girl before Clara, Mary something, she brought in $200. Silas figured Clara would get at least that much. Clara made a small sound. Elias looked back at her and saw tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sobbing, just silent crying, like she'd done it so many times she'd learned to do it quiet. What happened to Mary? Elias asked. Sold her to some rancher up north, Nebraska, I think. Or maybe it was Wyoming. Dutch shrugged. Don't know if she's even alive anymore. Wasn't my business to ask. But you helped anyway. You knew what was happening, and you helped. A man's got to make a living. Elias stared at Dutch for a long moment. Then he raised his rifle and fired. Not at Dutch, but at a rock beside his head. The man flinched so hard he screamed. That's for shooting at a child, Elias said. He fired again, the bullet striking even closer. That's for Mary. And this... He chambered another round but didn't fire. This is your reminder to get the hell out of Kansas and never come back, because if I see you again, I won't miss. He grabbed Dutch's rifle and smashed it against a boulder, breaking the stock. Then he took the man's ammunition and threw it as far as he could into the creek. Dutch watched helplessly, clutching his bleeding leg. You can't leave me out here, Dutch said. I'll freeze to death. Then you better start walking. Town's about 12 miles that way. Elias pointed. Of course, with that leg, might take you a while. Best get started. He turned and walked back to Clara. She was still crying silently, her small fists clenched at her sides. Come on, he said gently. We need to keep moving. $200, Clara whispered. That's what I'm worth. $200. No. Elias crouched in front of her. That's what evil men think you're worth. But they're wrong. You're worth a hell of a lot more than that. How do you know? Because worth isn't measured in money. It's measured in, he struggled for the words, in whether you make the world better or worse, in whether people are glad you're alive. And I'm glad you're alive, Clara. So that makes you priceless, far as I'm concerned. She looked at him with those two old eyes. Then, suddenly, she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight. Elias stood, lifting her with him, and carried her back to the horse. Behind them, Dutch was trying to stand, failing, falling back with a curse. Good. Let him suffer. Let him think about what he'd done while he crawled back to town. They reached the line shack as the sun was setting. It was worse than Elias remembered. The roof had partially collapsed on one side. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and snow had drifted through the broken windows. But it was shelter, and more importantly, it was isolated. Nobody would think to look for them here. Home sweet home, Elias muttered. Clara looked at the ramshackle building without comment. After what she'd been through, a leaking roof probably seemed like luxury. Elias got a fire going in the old stone fireplace, using deadwood from the surrounding forest. The chimney still drew, more or less, though smoke leaked out through cracks in the stonework. He spread blankets on the driest section of floor and made Clara sit close to the fire. How's your leg? She asked. Elias looked down. He'd almost forgotten. Dutch's bullet had grazed him when they were running for the trees, just a shallow furrow along his ribs, not serious, but it had bled enough to soak his shirt. It's fine. You're bleeding. I said it's fine. Clara stood and came over to him. Let me see. Clara? You took care of my feet when they were frozen. Let me help. Elias sighed and removed his coat and shirt. The wound was ugly but superficial. Clara tore a strip from one of the blankets and wrapped it around his ribs with surprising competence. Where'd you learn to do that? He asked. Had to patch myself up plenty of times. Mama didn't like doctors, said they cost too much. Clara tied off the bandage. There. Should stop the bleeding at least. Thank you. They sat by the fire as darkness fell outside. Elias made a thin soup from the jerky and some snow melted in his tin cup. It wasn't much, but it was warm. Clara drank hers without complaint. What happens now? She asked. We wait. Give Ward time to work on the judge, see if he can get those documents thrown out. And if he can't, then we figure out something else. Like what? Elias didn't have an answer for that. Running forever wasn't an option. They'd eventually get caught. Fighting Silas and his whole operation alone was suicide. The law was supposed to protect children like Clara, but the law seemed more interested in paperwork than people. What Dutch said, Clara continued quietly, about the girl before me. Mary. Do you think we could find her? Maybe. Why? Because if we find her, if she tells what happened to her, that proves Silas is lying. That proves he's been doing this to other kids. Clara looked at Elias with sudden intensity. That could stop him. Not just for me, for everyone. Elias considered this. The girl had a point. One child's word against a man with legal documents wasn't much. But multiple children? A pattern of behavior? That might be enough to make the law take notice. Finding her would take time, he said, and we don't even know where to start looking. Dutch said Wyoming or Nebraska. That's a lot of territory. But we could try. We could. Elias poked at the fire. But first we need to survive the next few days. Silas isn't going to stop hunting us. Clara nodded. She was quiet for a while, staring into the flames. Then, Mr. Crow, do you think my mama knew what Silas was going to do to me? There it was. The question she'd probably been carrying since Dutch confirmed her mother had taken the money and run. Elias could lie, could tell her that her mother didn't know, that she'd been tricked, that she'd thought Clara was going to a better life. But Clara deserved the truth, even when it hurt. I think she probably knew, he said quietly, or at least suspected, and I think she did it anyway because she cared more about the money than about you. Clara's face crumpled. Why? What did I do wrong? Nothing. You didn't do a damn thing wrong. Elias moved closer to her. Some people are just broken inside. Your mama was one of them, but that's her failing, not yours. You understand me? Then why does it hurt so much? Because you loved her anyway. Because she was your mama, and you wanted her to love you back. Elias put his hand on Clara's shoulder. And that's not wrong either. That's what makes you better than her. Clara cried then. Really cried. Not the silent tears from before. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Elias held her and let her cry, staring at the fire and thinking about all the ways the world could break a person. After a while, she fell asleep against him, exhausted. Elias laid her down on the blankets and covered her carefully. Then he sat by the fire with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the broken windows. Sometime around midnight, he heard sounds outside. Footsteps crunching in snow. More than one set. Elias stood silently, moving to the window. Moonlight illuminated 3 figures approaching through the trees. They moved cautiously, rifles ready. Elias couldn't make out faces, but he didn't need to. Silas had found them. But how? Dutch should still be making his way back to town, and even if he'd made it somehow, he didn't know where the line shack was. Unless someone else had told them. Elias thought about Ward's promise to buy them time. Thought about how quickly these men had found them despite taking a route nobody should have predicted. Thought about the judge's convenient decision to delay while Clara's mother was located. Maybe Ward had been helping them all along. Or maybe someone in town had seen them leave and told Silas which way they'd gone. Either way, Elias was out of time. He woke Clara with a hand over her mouth. Her eyes flew open in panic, but he put a finger to his lips. She nodded, understanding immediately. We have to run, he whispered. Out the back. Quiet as you can. Clara gathered the blankets while Elias grabbed his rifle and the supply bag. The back of the line shack had a gap where the wall had rotted through, big enough for them to slip out if they moved fast. Outside, the 3 men were almost to the front door. Elias could hear them talking in low voices, coordinating their approach. He and Clara crawled through the gap and into the forest behind the shack. The trees were thick here, providing cover. They moved as quietly as possible, Clara following close behind him. Behind them, someone kicked in the lined shack door. Shouts of surprise when they found it empty. Then the sound of men spreading out to search. Elias and Clara ran. The forest was dark and treacherous, full of hidden roots and deadfalls. Elias kept one hand on Clara's arm to keep her from falling. Behind them, lantern light bobbed through the trees. The men were spreading out, trying to cut off escape routes. They ran for maybe 20 minutes before Elias realized they were being herded. The men behind them were driving them toward something, pushing them in a specific direction rather than trying to catch them outright. He stopped, pulling Clara down behind a fallen log. A moment later, 2 more men appeared ahead of them, blocking the path. Elias cursed under his breath. They'd walked right into a trap. 5 men total, maybe 6, all armed, all between Elias and any clear escape route. "Well," a familiar voice called out. "Looks like we have a problem." Silas emerged from the shadows, lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. He looked different now. The pleasant facade was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "You made this much harder than it needed to be, Mr. Crow," Silas continued. "All I wanted was what belonged to me. But you had to interfere, had to play the hero." Elias stood, putting himself between Silas and Clara. "The girl doesn't belong to you. The law says otherwise. The law's wrong. Perhaps, but it's still the law." Silas smiled. "Now, you have 2 choices. You can give me the girl and walk away. Or you can die here and I take her anyway. Your decision." Elias raised his rifle. 5 men raised theirs in response. "Seems like a poor decision," Silas observed. "Seems like you don't know me very well. I know you're a washed-up drunk who lost his family and spent the last decade feeling sorry for himself. I know you're looking for redemption in that child, trying to make up for the son you couldn't save." Silas's voice was mocking. "But here's the truth, Crow. You can't save her any more than you saved him. You're just going to get yourself killed for nothing." The words hit harder than Elias expected, because they were true, at least partly. He was trying to make up for Thomas. Trying to save someone this time, trying to matter. But that didn't make it wrong. "Maybe," Elias said, "but at least I'll die trying to do something right." "What will you die for, Silas? Money? That really worth it?" Something flickered in Silas's eyes, doubt maybe, or just irritation. "Last chance," Silas said. "Give me the girl." Behind Elias, Clara stood up. He tried to push her back down, but she shook her head. "No," she said. Her voice was small but clear. "I'm not going with you. I'd rather die." Silas's face hardened. "Fine. Have it your way." He raised his revolver. The shot, when it came, wasn't from Silas's gun. It came from the trees to the left, and it took down one of Silas's men before anyone could react. Then another shot, and another. Men scattered, diving for cover, returning fire at shadows. Sheriff Ward emerged from the darkness with 3 deputies, all armed. They'd set up a crossfire that caught Silas's men perfectly. "Drop your weapons," Ward shouted. "All of you, now!" For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of Silas's men, the one called Preacher, dropped his rifle and raised his hands. The others followed suit slowly, realizing they were outgunned and surrounded. Everyone except Silas. He stood there with his revolver still raised, his face twisted with rage. "You," he said, staring at Ward. "You set us up." "I followed you," Ward corrected. "Figured you'd try something stupid once you realized the girl was gone. Wasn't hard to track 6 men through fresh snow. This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Ward gestured with his rifle. "Put down the gun, Silas." For a long moment, Elias thought Silas would shoot anyway. Would take Clara with him out of pure spite. His finger tightened on the trigger, his eyes locked on the girl. Then slowly, he lowered the revolver and dropped it in the snow. "Smart man," Ward said. The deputies moved in, collecting weapons and tying hands. Elias lowered his rifle, suddenly exhausted. Clara was shaking beside him, her hand clutching his coat. Ward approached them. "You 2 all right?" "We're alive," Elias said. "How'd you find us?" "Tracked Dutch when he came crawling back to town this afternoon. He was pretty forthcoming once I mentioned charging him as an accomplice to attempted murder." Ward looked at Clara. "He told me everything, about Mary, about the others, about the whole operation." "There's proof then, real proof. Enough to bury Silas and his whole crew, Judge Whitaker's drawing up arrest warrants as we speak. Ward paused. We're also sending telegrams to Nebraska and Wyoming, going to try and find that girl Mary, get her testimony too. Clara looked up at Elias. We did it? Looks like. She hugged him suddenly, holding on tight. Elias stood there awkwardly while Ward watched with something like approval on his weathered face. Come on, the sheriff said finally. Let's get you two back to town. Martha's been worried sick. They walked back through the forest, deputies leading the bound prisoners ahead of them. Silas didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. He just stared straight ahead with those snake eyes, his expression unreadable. He'll hang for this, Ward said quietly to Elias. What he did to those kids, Judge won't show mercy. Good. They reached the horses tied near the line shack. As the deputies loaded prisoners onto mounts, Ward pulled Elias aside. I need to ask you something, the sheriff said. When this is all over, when the trial's done and Silas is in the ground, what happens to Clara? Elias looked at the girl standing by his horse, waiting for him. I don't know, he admitted. I hadn't thought that far ahead. You should start thinking about it, because that child's got nobody else in the world except you. Ward met his eyes. Question is, are you going to step up, or are you going to hand her off to some orphanage and go back to drinking yourself to death? The question hung in the cold air between them. Elias thought about his empty ranch, his empty life. Thought about the last 11 years spent slowly dying inside. Then he thought about Clara, about her smile when she'd helped bandage his wound, about her bravery in the courtroom, about the way she'd said she'd rather die than go back to Silas. I'll step up, he said quietly. Ward nodded. Good, because I think you two need each other. They rode back to town in the pre-dawn darkness. Clara fell asleep against Elias's chest, her head tucked under his chin. He held her carefully, aware of how fragile she felt, how easy it would be to break something so small. But she wasn't fragile, he realized. She'd survived things that would have destroyed most adults. She'd run through a blizzard barefoot. She'd faced down her abuser in court. She'd kept fighting even when the whole world seemed set against her. No, Clara wasn't fragile at all. She was strong, maybe stronger than Elias himself. As they entered town, the sun was rising red and cold over the prairie. People were starting to emerge from their houses, curious about the commotion. When they saw Silas and his men bound and defeated, a murmur ran through the growing crowd. Judge Whitaker was waiting on the courthouse steps. He took one look at the prisoners and nodded with grim satisfaction. Get them in cells, he told Ward. I'll start the paperwork for trial. Yes, sir. Whitaker turned to Elias. Mr. Crow, a word. Elias dismounted carefully, making sure not to wake Clara. Martha Ward had appeared and took the sleeping girl from him, carrying her into the house. Elias followed the judge into the courthouse. I owe you an apology, Whitaker said once they were alone. I almost made a terrible mistake with those custody papers. Almost handed that child back to a monster. You didn't, though. Only because you refused to give up. Most men would have accepted my ruling and moved on. The judge sat heavily behind his desk. You broke several laws protecting that girl. Fled custody, interfered with a legal proceeding, shot a man. Dutch isn't dead, just wounded. Still assault with a deadly weapon. Whitaker studied Elias. I should charge you. But you won't. No, I won't. Because you did the right thing, even when the law said otherwise. The judge pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Now let's talk about Clara's future. They talked for over an hour. About custody, about adoption, about what it would mean for Elias to take legal responsibility for a child. Whitaker explained the process, the requirements, the scrutiny Elias would face. You understand what you're taking on? The judge asked finally. Raising a child alone isn't easy, especially one who's been through what Clara has. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't some grand gesture you can back out of when it gets hard. This is a lifetime commitment. Elias thought about that, about waking up every morning with someone depending on him, about having to care again, really care, about whether he lived or died, about opening himself up to the possibility of losing someone he loved all over again. It was terrifying. It was also the first thing that had felt right in 11 years. I understand, he said again, and I want to do it anyway. Whitaker studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded and began writing. I'll start the paperwork, he said. It'll take a few weeks to finalize, but I don't see any reason why it shouldn't go through. In the meantime, Clara will remain in your custody. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just take care of that little girl." Elias left the courthouse as the sun climbed higher in the winter sky. The town was buzzing with news of Silas's arrest, people gathering in groups to discuss what had happened. Elias ignored them and went straight to Ward's house. Martha met him at the door. "She's sleeping," she said softly. "Poor thing was exhausted." "I can wait." "Actually, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to you." Martha led him into the kitchen and poured coffee. "That child adores you. You know that, right? I'm just someone who helped her. You're more than that to her. You're the first person who chose her, who fought for her, who made her feel like she mattered." Martha sat across from him. "Don't underestimate what that means." Elias wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "I don't know how to be a father. I failed at it once already." "You didn't fail. Your son got sick. That wasn't your fault." "I should have done more. Should have gotten him to a better doctor. Should have what? Changed the past? Elias, you can't save Thomas. He's gone. But you can save Clara. She's right here, right now, and she needs you." Elias stared into his coffee. "What if I mess it up again?" "Then you mess it up. But at least you tried. At least you gave her a chance." Martha reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're a good man, Elias Crow. It's time you started acting like it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Elias heard footsteps on the stairs. Clara appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Mr. Crow," she said sleepily, "you're still here? Where else would I be?" She crossed to him and climbed into his lap, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Elias stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, putting his arms around her. "I had a bad dream," Clara said. "I dreamed Silas took me away and you couldn't find me. That's not going to happen. Silas is in jail. He can't hurt you anymore." "Promise?" "Promise." Clara was quiet, her head against his chest. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. When all this is over, when the trial's done and everything's settled, what happens to me? Where do I go?" This was it, the moment Elias had been avoiding thinking about since the moment he'd found Clara in the snow. "Well," he said carefully, "I was thinking maybe you could come live with me. On the ranch. Permanently." Clara went very still. "Really?" "If you want to. I know it's not much, just a ranch in the middle of nowhere with an old man who doesn't know the first thing about raising a little girl. But it's better than an orphanage, I figure." "Better than an orphanage?" Clara pulled back to look at him. "It's everything. It's perfect." "It's not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes." "I don't care. I want to stay with you." Her eyes filled with tears. Can I really stay?" "Yeah, you can really stay." And she hugged him so hard he could barely breathe. Over her head, Elias saw Martha wipe at her eyes. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Elias held her and thought about second chances, about how sometimes the thing you needed most found you in the middle of a blizzard, about how sometimes the thing you thought you'd lost forever came back in a different form. He wasn't getting his son back. Thomas was gone, and nothing would change that. But maybe, just maybe, he could be the father Clara needed, could give her the life she deserved, could prove that one good choice, opening a door on a winter night, could change everything that came after. "You're welcome," he said quietly, and meant it. The trial took 3 weeks to organize. In that time, Clara stayed with Elias at the Ward's house, while Judge Whitaker assembled evidence and tracked down witnesses. The telegrams to Nebraska and Wyoming had yielded results. Mary Hutchins, the girl Dutch had mentioned, was found alive working on a ranch outside Cheyenne. She was 11 now, and when Ward's counterpart in Wyoming interviewed her, she'd confirmed everything. Silas had bought her from her stepfather for $150, kept her in a wagon for 2 weeks, then sold her to a rancher who'd needed help with his invalid wife. The rancher had treated her decently enough, but he'd known the circumstances were wrong and had kept quiet about it out of fear. Now he was facing charges too. 2 other children were found through similar channels, a boy in Missouri, a girl in Colorado. The pattern was clear and damning. Silas Boone had been trafficking children for at least 5 years, maybe longer. The full scope of his operation was still being uncovered. Elias spent those 3 weeks trying to figure out how to be what Clara needed. It wasn't easy. He'd been alone so long he'd forgotten how to share space with another person. Clara was quiet most of the time, but she had needs. Needed food at regular intervals. Needed reassurance when nightmares woke her screaming. Needed someone to sit with her when the fear got too heavy. Martha helped. She taught Elias the small things he'd forgotten. How to braid a little girl's hair. What foods children actually liked versus what adults thought they should eat. How to tell the difference between a tantrum and a genuine meltdown. "You're doing fine," Martha told him one afternoon while Clara was napping. "Stop worrying so much." "She deserves better than fine. She deserves someone who cares. And that's you." Martha was kneading bread dough, her hands working the mixture with practiced efficiency. "You know what she told me yesterday? She said you were the bravest person she'd ever met." "That's ridiculous. I'm not brave." "You stood up to 6 armed men for a child you'd known 3 days. What would you call that?" "Stubborn," Martha laughed. "Call it what you want. To her, you're a hero." Elias didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who was barely keeping his head above water, trying not to drown a child in the process. Every night he lay awake thinking about all the ways he could fail Clara. What if she got sick and he couldn't afford a doctor? What if other kids at school were cruel to her because of her past? What if she grew up and realized she'd wasted her childhood with a bitter old man on a failing ranch? But every morning Clara woke up and smiled at him, and those fears seemed smaller somehow. The trial began on a gray Monday in late January. The courthouse was packed, seemed like half the county had turned out to watch. Elias sat in the front row with Clara beside him, her small hand gripping his so tight his fingers went numb. Judge Whitaker presided, his expression carved from granite. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. Dutch's testimony, Mary's testimony, the forged documents, the financial records showing payments that corresponded to child acquisitions. They brought in Clara's mother's landlady from the boarding house, who testified that she'd seen Silas give the woman money and watched her count it twice before handing Clara over. Silas's lawyer, a sharp-faced man from Topeka, tried to argue that his client was simply a charitable man who took in children from desperate circumstances, that any subsequent transfers of custody were legal and properly documented, that the children's testimonies were unreliable given their age and circumstances. The jury wasn't buying it. On the third day, Clara had to testify. Elias had tried to prepare her, but there was no preparing a child for standing in front of a room full of strangers and reliving the worst moments of her life. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. The prosecutor, a young man named Harrison with kind eyes, spoke to her gently. "Clara, can you tell us what happened when Mr. Boone took you from your mother?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "He gave Mama money. She told me to go with him." "Did you want to go?" "No, I was scared, but Mama said I had to." "What happened after you left with Mr. Boone?" Clara described the wagon, the camp, the men who talked about selling her like she was livestock. She told them about being tied up, about Silas hitting her when she cried. Her voice never rose above a whisper, but everyone in the courtroom heard every word. When she described escaping during the blizzard, several women in the gallery were openly crying. "Why did you run away?" Harrison asked. "Because I knew if I stayed, something bad would happen to me. Something worse than freezing to death." Clara looked directly at Silas for the first time. "He said I was an investment, that I'd bring good money once I was cleaned up." Silas's lawyer objected. "The witness is a child with a history of fabrication." "Overruled," Whitaker said coldly. "Continue, Miss Vale." Clara told them about finding Elias's ranch, about collapsing in the snow, about Elias opening the door and giving her food, even though he didn't know her, didn't owe her anything. "Did Mr. Crow ever hurt you or threaten you?" Harrison asked. "No, never. He protected me, even when it put his own life in danger." "Yes." When Clara was finally allowed to step down, she ran straight to Elias. He picked her up without thinking about how it looked, just held her while she shook. Silas's lawyer called no witnesses in his client's defense. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Whitaker scheduled sentencing for the following week, but everyone knew what it would be. Kansas had strong feelings about men who hurt children. Silas would hang. As they led him out of the courtroom in chains, Silas looked back at Clara one last time. Whatever he saw in her face, defiance, maybe, or just the absence of fear, made something in his expression crack. He looked away and didn't look back again. After the trial, life started to settle into something resembling normal. Judge Whitaker finalized the custody paperwork, making Elias Clara's legal guardian. The process involved more questions, more scrutiny, more reminders that Elias was an old man with no experience raising children. But Whitaker signed the papers anyway. "Don't make me regret this," the judge said, handing Elias the documents. "I'll do my best." "Your best better be damn good. That little girl's been through enough." "I know." They moved back to the ranch in early February. The cabin looked different than Elias remembered, smaller, shabbier. Clara stood in the doorway, taking it in. "It's not much," Elias said. "It's perfect," Clara said. Again with that word. Perfect. Like she didn't know what the word actually meant. But she set about making it a home anyway. She helped Elias clean, patch the roof, fix the broken shutters. She fed the chickens and learned to milk the cow. She talked to the animals like they were friends and named the horses, Bess and Old Jack, even though Elias had never bothered. At night they sat by the fire and Clara practiced her reading. She was behind where she should be for her age, but she was smart and determined. Elias found some old primers in town and worked through them with her, stumbling over teaching methods he'd never learned. "You're not very good at this," Clara observed one evening, after he'd tried and failed to explain long vowels. "Never said I was." "Maybe we should ask Mrs. Ward for help." "Maybe we should." Martha started coming by twice a week to tutor Clara properly. Elias used that time to work on the ranch, rebuilding fences, clearing fields, making plans for spring planting. For the first time in years, the future seemed like something worth planning for. But it wasn't all smooth. Clara had nightmares nearly every night, terrible, screaming nightmares that woke Elias from across the cabin. He'd rush to her side and find her thrashing in the blankets, crying for her mother, begging Silas not to hurt her. It took longer and longer each time to calm her down, to convince her she was safe. "I'm sorry," she'd say afterward, her face wet with tears. "I'm sorry I keep waking you up." "Don't apologize. It's not your fault." "But I should be over it by now. Silas is in jail. He can't hurt me anymore." "Healing doesn't work that way. Takes time." "How much time?" Elias didn't have an answer for that. There were other problems, too. Clara was terrified of being alone. If Elias went to town without her, she'd have a full panic attack by the time he returned. She hoarded food in her room, hiding bread and jerky under her mattress, like she expected to starve again. She flinched at sudden movements and couldn't stand having anyone behind her where she couldn't see them. These weren't things Elias could fix with hard work or determination. They were wounds that went deep, that would take years to heal if they ever healed at all. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted to Ward one day when the sheriff stopped by. "I thought if I just gave her a safe place and enough food, that would be enough. But it's not. Of course it's not. She needs more than food and shelter. She needs to know you're not going to leave her." Ward leaned against the fence, watching Clara play with the chickens. "You ever tell her you love her?" "What?" "Simple question. You love that little girl?" Elias felt heat rise in his face. "I don't. That's not something I'm good at saying." "Then get good at it, because she needs to hear it." "She knows I care about her." "Does she? Or does she think you're just doing your duty, that you took her in because you felt obligated?" Ward looked at him. "Kids who've been abandoned, they need to hear it plain. They need to know they're wanted." That night, after Clara's nightmare subsided and she was lying quiet in his arms, Elias tried. "Clara, I want you to know something." "Okay. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you knocked on my door that night." She was quiet for a moment. "Really?" "Really. Before you came, I was just existing, waiting to die, basically. But you gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You made everything matter again. So you don't regret taking me in?" "Not for 1 second." Clara hugged him tighter. "I love you, Pa." The word hit him like a physical blow. Pa. She'd called him that once before, months ago, but it had felt tentative then, testing the word out. This time it sounded permanent. "Can I call you that?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. "Or is it too soon?" Elias's throat felt tight. "No, it's not too soon." "So I can?" "Yeah, you can call me Pa." Clara smiled against his shoulder. Okay. Good night, Pa. Good night, Clara. He held her until she fell back asleep, then carried her to her bed. As he tucked the blankets around her, he realized Ward was right. This child didn't just need safety and food. She needed to be loved, to be chosen, to matter to someone. And she did matter. More than Elias had thought possible. Spring came slowly to the Kansas prairie. The snow melted, revealing brown grass and muddy fields. Elias planted wheat and corn, Clara helping where she could. She was small but strong, willing to work hard without complaint. Other ranchers started stopping by, people Elias hadn't spoken to in years. They came under various pretenses, but really they were checking on Clara, making sure Elias was treating her right. The town had watched the trial, had seen what she'd survived. They felt protective of her. Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch brought over fresh eggs and stayed for coffee. She spent most of the visit talking to Clara, asking about her reading lessons and whether she liked living on the ranch. She seems happy, Mrs. Henderson told Elias on her way out. That's good. That's real good. More visitors came. The pastor's wife brought fabric for new dresses. The schoolteacher stopped by to assess whether Clara was ready to start classes in the fall. The doctor came to check her health. She was underweight still, and her feet had some permanent nerve damage from the frostbite. But otherwise, she was recovering well. Through it all, Clara handled the attention with grace that surprised Elias. She was polite to everyone, answered their questions, accepted their gifts. But as soon as they left, she'd run to Elias and press close to his side. Too many people, she'd mutter. I know, but they mean well. I just want it to be us. Elias understood that feeling. He'd spent 11 years pushing people away, preferring solitude to the risk of caring. But now he was learning that isolation wasn't safety. It was just another kind of prison. We need people, he told Clara. Can't do everything alone. But what if they leave? What if they decide they don't want to be around us anymore? Then they leave. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Clara considered this. Is that what happened with your friends? Before? Did they leave? No, I left them. After my wife and son died, I pushed everyone away. Thought it was easier than letting people see how broken I was. Elias pulled Clara onto his lap. But I was wrong. Being alone didn't make the pain less, just made it last longer. Do you still miss them, your wife and son? Every day. Does it ever stop hurting? Elias thought about that. No, but it hurts different over time, less sharp, more like an old ache than a fresh wound. Will I always miss my mama, even though she was awful to me? Probably, because she was still your mama, and you wanted her to love you the way a mama should. He smoothed her hair. But that doesn't mean you have to forgive her. Missing someone and forgiving them are different things. Clara nodded against his chest. They sat like that for a while, watching the sun set over the prairie through the window. In March, word came from Topeka. Silas Boone had been hanged at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Dutch and 2 of the other men had gotten prison sentences. The rest had turned state's evidence in exchange for lighter charges. Elias wasn't sure whether to tell Clara or not. Martha said she had a right to know, that not telling her would be lying by omission. Ward said maybe she was too young for that kind of news. Elias decided to tell her. They were feeding the chickens when he brought it up. Clara, there's something you should know. The judge sentenced Silas last week. Clara went very still. What happened to him? He was hanged. He's dead now. Can't hurt anyone ever again. Clara stood there holding the feed bucket, staring at nothing. Elias waited, not sure what reaction to expect. Relief? Fear? Satisfaction? What he got was tears. Clara set down the bucket and cried. Not the panicked sobs from her nightmares, but quiet, sad crying that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. I thought I'd be happy, she said. I thought when he was gone I'd feel safe, but I just feel empty. That's normal. It is? Yeah, ending something, even something bad, leaves a hole. Takes time to figure out how to fill it. Elias knelt beside her. But you will figure it out. And I'll help you. Clara hugged him tight. Promise? Promise. The nightmares continued, but they came less frequently. Once a week instead of every night. Then once every 2 weeks. Clara was still nervous around strangers, still hoarded food, still had moments of raw panic. But she was also laughing more, playing more, letting herself be a child. Summer arrived hot and dry. The crop struggled but didn't die. Elias hired a hand to help with the heavier work. A young man named Jimmy who'd just gotten back from working cattle drives. Clara was shy around him at first, but Jimmy was patient and kind, treating her like a little sister. "She's good people," Jimmy told Elias one day while they were mending fence. "Been through hell, but she's still got a good heart." "Yeah," Elias agreed. "You done right by her, taking her in like you did. She gave me as much as I gave her, maybe more." Jimmy nodded like he understood, though at 23 he probably didn't. Not really, but that was all right. In August, Clara turned 6. Elias hadn't known her exact birthday. She didn't know it either, so they'd picked a day together. August 15th, right in the middle of summer. Martha helped Elias plan a party. Small, just a few people from town and the neighboring ranches. They made a cake. Elias's first attempt at baking anything more complicated than biscuits. It came out lopsided and the frosting was runny, but Clara's face when she saw it made every frustrating moment worth it. "Is this really for me?" she asked. "Who else would it be for?" "But it's so much." "You deserve much." She blew out the candles, 6 of them, plus one to grow on, and made a wish she wouldn't tell anyone. Later, after the guests had left and the cabin was quiet again, Elias asked what she'd wished for. "Can't tell you, or it won't come true." Fair enough. But she told him anyway, crawling into his lap as the sun set. "I wish that we could stay together forever, that you'd never get tired of me and send me away." Elias felt his chest tighten. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to send you away, ever. You're my daughter now. That's not something that changes." "But what if I'm bad? What if I make too many mistakes?" "Then you make mistakes and we work through them. That's what families do." "We're a family?" "Yeah, we're a family." Clara smiled, that rare, full smile that made her whole face light up. "Good, because I can't imagine being anywhere else." That night, for the first time since moving to the ranch, Clara slept through without nightmares. Fall came with cold winds and the promise of winter. Elias took Clara into town to buy her first real winter coat, a blue wool one with brass buttons that she refused to take off, even in the warm general store. "I've never had anything so nice," she said, stroking the fabric. "Get used to it. You're going to have lots of nice things from now on." "I don't need nice things. I just need you." But Elias bought her the coat anyway, and new boots, and a warm hat with ear flaps. Winter was coming, and this time Clara would face it properly equipped. School started in September. Clara was nervous. She'd never been to school before, and she was behind the other children her age. But the teacher, Miss Palmer, was patient and kind. She worked with Clara separately at first, helping her catch up. The other children were less kind. Clara came home crying the second week. Some of the older boys had been teasing her, calling her names, saying she was the girl who'd been sold like a cow. One had asked how much she'd cost. Elias saw red. He wanted to ride into town and have words with those boys' fathers, maybe more than words. But Clara stopped him. "It's okay, Pa, they're just stupid." "That doesn't make it okay." "I know, but getting mad won't help. Miss Palmer already talked to them." And they have to apologize tomorrow, but even if they don't mean it, at least they'll leave me alone." Elias looked at this small, brave child who'd learned too young that the world was cruel and unfair, but who kept going anyway. "You're stronger than me," he said. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are. I would have decked those boys." Clara giggled. "That's because you're old and grumpy. Watch it, or I'll be old and grumpy right at you." She laughed harder, and just like that, the moment passed. The hurt was still there, would probably always be there in some form. But she was learning to carry it without letting it crush her. That was all Elias could ask for. Winter arrived early that year, snow falling in October. Clara helped Elias prepare the cabin, sealing cracks and stocking firewood. They had plenty of food this time. The harvest had been decent, and Elias had made sure to buy extra supplies in town. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Clara had first knocked on Elias's door, they sat by the fire together. Clara was reading aloud from a book Miss Palmer had lent her, stumbling over the harder words but pushing through. "Remember last year?" she asked when she'd finished the chapter. "Yeah. I was so scared, I thought I was going to die in the snow." "But you didn't, because you opened the door." She looked at him. Why did you? Most people would have left me there. Elias thought about that. I don't know. Just seemed like the thing to do. I'm glad you did it. Me too. Clara closed the book and set it aside. Pa, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think you'll ever get married again? Have more kids? The question surprised him. Where's this coming from? Some of the kids at school said you're too old to raise me by yourself, that you should find a wife to help. The kids at school should mind their own business. But are they right? Would it be easier if you had help? Elias pulled Clara closer. Maybe, but easy isn't always better. And besides, you're all the family I need. Really? Really? She smiled and leaned against his shoulder. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, quiet flakes that covered the prairie in white. But inside the cabin was warm and bright, filled with the sound of the fire crackling and the comfortable silence of two people who'd found each other when they both needed finding. Pa? Clara said after a while. Yeah? I love you. I love you too, Clara. And he did. More than he'd thought possible. This strange, broken child who'd appeared in a blizzard had become his whole world. She'd given him purpose, given him hope, given him a reason to care about tomorrow. She'd saved him just as surely as he'd saved her. The snow kept falling outside, but neither of them were afraid of it anymore. They had each other, and a warm fire, and a future stretching out ahead of them full of possibility. That was more than enough. That was everything. Years passed the way they do on the prairie, slowly at first, then all at once, marked not by calendars but by the rhythm of seasons and the small changes that accumulate into something larger. Clara grew, not just taller and stronger, but into herself. The frightened child who'd collapsed in the snow became a girl who could rope a calf, plant a straight furrow, and read Shakespeare aloud by firelight without stumbling over the difficult words. The nightmares faded to occasional bad dreams. The food hoarding stopped. She learned to trust that tomorrow would come with enough to eat, that Elias would still be there when she woke up. But some things stayed with her. She never lost her wariness of strangers, never quite managed to be comfortable in crowds. Loud noises made her flinch. She couldn't stand to be restrained, even playfully. These weren't things that needed fixing. They were just part of who she was, scars that had healed but left their mark. Elias learned to read these signs, to know when Clara needed space and when she needed closeness. It didn't come naturally to him. He was still a man of few words, still more comfortable with silence than conversation. But he tried, and Clara seemed to understand that trying was what mattered. The ranch prospered in small ways. Not rich, never rich, but stable. Elias hired Jimmy full-time when the young man proved reliable and good with both cattle and Clara. Together they expanded the herd, repaired buildings that had been falling apart for years, brought the land back to something resembling productive. People in town noticed the change. The bitter ghost who'd haunted his own property for 11 years was gone, replaced by a man who came to town regularly, who nodded to neighbors, who showed up for barn raisings and harvest festivals because his daughter wanted to go. Never thought I'd see Elias Crow at a church social, Sheriff Ward remarked one Sunday afternoon, watching Elias stand awkwardly on the edge of the gathering while Clara played with the other children. Never thought I'd be at one, Elias admitted. But she wants to be normal, have friends. Can't do that if I keep her isolated on the ranch. She seems happy. Most days. Elias watched Clara laugh at something another girl said. Still has rough patches, though. Probably always will. That's life. We're all carrying something. Ward sipped his lemonade. But she's got you. That counts for more than you know. It was true that Clara seemed to thrive despite everything. She excelled in school once she'd caught up, developing a particular talent for mathematics that surprised everyone, including herself. Miss Palmer said she had a mind for numbers, could calculate complex problems faster than children twice her age. Where'd that come from? Elias asked one evening after Clara had helped him work out the ranch's finances in half the time it usually took him. Don't know. Maybe from my real pa, I mean. Mama said he was good with figures. Clara paused, always careful with language now. She called Elias pa without hesitation, but sometimes still made the distinction when talking about her biological father. He died when I was 3. I don't really remember him. Do you remember anything good before things got bad? Clara thought about it. I remember him singing sometimes, and I remember feeling safe. That's about it. That's something. Yeah. She went back to the ledger. Pa, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you really take me in? And don't say it just seemed like the thing to do. Elias set down his pen. They'd been building to this conversation for years. He could feel it coming like weather on the horizon. Honest answer? Always. I was dying. Not physically, but inside. Had been for 11 years. And then you showed up, and suddenly I had a reason not to die anymore. He looked at her. You saved my life just as much as I saved yours. But you could have just helped me and sent me somewhere else, to an orphanage or something. You didn't have to keep me. No, I didn't have to. I wanted to. Elias struggled for the right words. After I lost Thomas and Mary, my wife and son, I thought the best way to avoid getting hurt again was to not care about anything. But that's not living. That's just waiting to die. You taught me that caring about something, even when it scares you, is what makes life worth living. Claire's eyes were wet. I wish I could have met them. Your first family. They would have loved you. You think? I know. She hugged him then, sudden and fierce. I'm glad you opened the door that night. Me too, kid. Me too. When Clara turned 12, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from Wyoming, from Mary Hutchins, the girl who'd been taken by Silas years before Clara. She'd heard about Clara's case, about the trial, about how Clara was living with the man who'd fought to protect her. Dear Clara, the letter began in careful handwriting. You don't know me, but we share something terrible. We also share something good. We survived. I wanted you to know you're not alone, and I wanted to say thank you. Because of you speaking up, they found me. Because of you, Silas can't hurt anyone else ever again. You're braver than you know. Your friend, Mary. Clara read the letter 3 times, then looked at Elias with something like wonder. She thinks I'm brave. You are brave, but I was so scared through all of it. Still am sometimes. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs doing despite the fear. Elias had told her this before, but some lessons needed repeating. You faced Silas in court when you could have stayed silent. You survived when most people would have given up. That's brave. Clara folded the letter carefully. Can I write back to her? Of course. They wrote letters back and forth after that. Clara and Mary, 2 girls connected by trauma, but refusing to be defined by it. Mary was doing well, had been formally adopted by the rancher and his wife after everything came to light. She was learning to be a seamstress, planned to open her own shop someday. She's got a plan, Clara said after reading one of Mary's letters. A real future mapped out. You got a future too. But I don't know what I want to do yet. Mary knows. You're 12. You got time to figure it out. But Clara seemed troubled by this, like not having a clear direction meant she was failing somehow. Elias recognized that anxiety, the need to prove she deserved the second chance she'd been given. Clara, listen to me. You don't have to earn your place in this world. You don't have to be perfect or have everything figured out. You just have to be you, and that's enough. But what if I waste it, this chance you gave me? You can't waste it by being uncertain. You waste it by being afraid to try anything. He pulled her close. Whatever you decide to do, wherever you decide to go, I'll support you. That's what parents do. She relaxed against him. Even if I want to leave the ranch someday, go to college maybe. The question hit Elias harder than he'd expected. He'd known this day would come. Clara was smart, ambitious, wanted more than a life confined to the prairie. But knowing it intellectually and facing it emotionally were different things. Even then, he managed, especially then. The years continued their steady march. Clara turned 14, then 15. She grew into a young woman who looked nothing like the starving child who'd knocked on Elias's door, but who still carried that child's memories like stones in her pocket, heavy, constant, but smoothed by time into something bearable. She graduated top of her class from the county school. Miss Palmer wrote a letter of recommendation to the teaching college in Topeka, calling Clara the brightest student she'd taught in 20 years. You really think I could be a teacher? Clara asked, staring at the acceptance letter that arrived that summer. I think you could be anything you want, Elias said, though his heart was breaking at the thought of her leaving. Clara looked at him, reading his face the way she'd learned to do. I don't have to go. I could stay here. Help run the ranch. No. But no, Clara. I didn't fight to save you, just so you could limit yourself out of obligation. Elias took her hands. You go to that college. You become a teacher. You live the life you deserve. But what about you? You're getting older. I'm 67, not dead. I got Jimmy to help with the heavy work. I'll be fine. I don't want to leave you alone. I won't be alone. You'll come back for holidays, and I'll come visit you sometimes. He squeezed her hands. This is what's supposed to happen. Children grow up and leave. Parents let them go. Clara cried, but she went. That first year was hard. The cabin felt too empty without her. Elias found himself cooking for two out of habit, then staring at the extra plate. He'd gotten used to her reading aloud in the evenings, to her laughter, to the sound of another person breathing in the room. But Clara wrote every week, long letters about her classes, her roommate, the city. She was thriving, learning, becoming herself in ways the ranch had never allowed. And that made the loneliness worth it. She came home for Christmas that first year, bursting through the door with stories and gifts and an energy that filled the cabin. Elias held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, not wanting to let go. I missed you, he said. I missed you too, Pa. They spent a week together, falling back into their old rhythms. But Elias could see the change in her, a confidence that came from making her own way, from discovering she could survive without him. It hurt a little, that growing independence, but it was good hurt, the kind that meant he'd done something right. When she left again in January, Elias stood on the porch and watched her wagon disappear into the distance. Jimmy came up beside him. Hard to watch them go, the younger man said. Yeah. But you did good by her, gave her wings. Just hope she remembers to fly back sometimes. She did. Every break, every holiday, Clara came home. And each time she brought more of the world with her, ideas, experiences, plans. After she graduated from teaching college, she got a position at a school in Junction City. Close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to have her own life. She met a man there, a lawyer named Daniel Cooper, who was kind and steady and didn't flinch when Clara told him about her past. Elias met him during one of Clara's visits home, sized him up over coffee. You understand what she's been through? Elias asked bluntly. She's told me some of it. I'm sure not all. She has nightmares sometimes, gets anxious in crowds, doesn't trust easy. I know. And you're okay with that? Daniel met his eyes. Mr. Crow, I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for Clara. Everything she is. Everything she's survived. That's who I love. Elias studied the young man for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right then. They married in the spring when Clara was 22. It was a small ceremony in Junction City, but Elias gave her away with pride swelling in his chest. This was his daughter, not by blood, but by choice and love and the simple act of opening a door on a winter night. You happy? He asked her before walking her down the aisle. Happier than I ever thought possible. Good. You deserve happy. So do you, Pa. I am happy. Seeing you like this is everything I wanted. She kissed his cheek. Thank you for everything. For saving me. For keeping me. For letting me go. You made it easy. That wasn't entirely true. Nothing about raising Clara had been easy, but it had been worth it. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every fear that he was doing it wrong. All worth it to see her standing here, whole and healthy and happy. Time moved faster after that. Clara and Daniel had a daughter, Emma, and then a son, Thomas. Clara insisted on the name, said it was the only thing that felt right. Elias held baby Thomas in his arms and felt the circle complete somehow. The child he'd lost, the child he'd saved, and now this new life carrying forward the name. He's perfect, Elias said, staring at his grandson's tiny face. Don't let him fool you. He screams like you wouldn't believe, Clara said, but she was smiling. Elias became a regular fixture in his grandchildren's lives. He taught Emma to ride when she was 5, helped Thomas build a treehouse when he was 7. They called him Grandpa Eli and thought of the ranch as their second home. Clara brought them every summer. They'd spend weeks running wild on the prairie, doing the same chores Clara had done, learning the same lessons. Elias watched them grow and saw Clara in their faces, saw himself in their determination. You're good at this. Clara told him one evening while they watched the children play. Being a grandpa. Got lots of practice being a PA. Think you'd do it different? If you could go back? Elias considered this. No, I made mistakes, sure, but we figured it out together. That's what mattered. I used to wonder, when I was little, if you regretted taking me in. If I was too much trouble. Never. Not once. Even when I had those nightmares every night, when I couldn't be alone, when I was afraid of everything? Especially then, because that's when you needed me most. Elias looked at her. You were never too much trouble, Clara. You were exactly what I needed. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I was so scared that night. When I knocked on your door, I didn't think anyone would help me. But you knocked anyway. Because I didn't have a choice. It was knock or die. That's life, though. Sometimes you just have to knock and hope someone answers. Elias put his arm around her. I'm glad you knocked. I'm glad I answered. They sat like that for a while, watching the sun set over the prairie. The same prairie where Elias had spent 11 years waiting to die. The same prairie where a child had appeared in a blizzard and changed everything. Elias got older. His joints ached more. His breath came harder. He hired more help for the ranch, slowly turning over the daily operations to Jimmy, who'd stayed loyal for 15 years and knew the land as well as Elias did. Clara worried about him living alone, offered to have him come stay with her and Daniel in Junction City. I appreciate it, Elias said, but this is my home. I'm not leaving. At least let me hire someone to check on you, make sure you're eating, taking care of yourself. I survived 67 years before you came along. Think I can manage a few more. You're 79 now, Pa. That's different. Only in numbers. But he let her hire Mrs. Henderson's daughter to come by twice a week. Not because he needed the help, but because it made Clara feel better. That's what you did for people you loved. You let them take care of you even when you didn't think you needed it. On Christmas Eve, when Elias was 83, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Clara and Daniel, Emma and her new husband, Thomas, and his fiancé, Jimmy, and his wife and their 3 kids. The cabin was packed, loud, full of life. Elias sat in his chair by the fire, watching everyone talk and laugh and argue good-naturedly. This was what he'd built. Not just a ranch, but a family. A legacy that had nothing to do with land or cattle and everything to do with people who cared about each other. Clara came and sat on the arm of his chair. What are you thinking about? About the night you came here. Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best night of my life, worst and best. Mine too. She took his hand. Pa, I want to tell you something. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Okay. When I was little, after the trial, Judge Whitaker asked me if I wanted to keep the name Vale or take yours. I chose Vale because I didn't think I deserved to be a crow yet. Thought I had to earn it. You didn't have to earn anything. I know that now, and I want to change it. Want to be Clara Crow legally, officially. Should have done it years ago. Elias felt his throat tighten. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. You're my father in every way that matters. I want my name to reflect that. What about your kids? They're Coopers, and that's fine. But I want to be a crow. She squeezed his hand. If that's okay with you. More than okay, Clara smiled. Good. I'll file the papers after the new year. Around them, the family continued their celebration. Elias looked at all these lives that had sprung from one choice. His choice to open a door, Clara's choice to knock. It seemed impossible that so much could come from such a small moment. But that's how life worked. Small choices rippling outward, creating futures you couldn't predict or control. You just had to make the choice and see where it led. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Elias stood on the porch and looked out at the snow-covered prairie. The moon was bright enough to see for miles. Somewhere out there, some version of him was still sitting alone in the dark, drinking whiskey and waiting to die. But not this version. This Elias had lived, had loved, had built something that would outlast him. He thought about the question that reporter had asked him years ago. What was the most important moment of his life? The answer was still the same. A frightened child had knocked on his door in winter, and he'd chosen to open it. Everything good had come from that single choice. Elias went back inside where it was warm. The fire was burning low but steady. He added another log and settled into his chair, listening to the sound of his family sleeping in the other rooms. This was enough. This was everything. He'd spent 11 years in darkness, thinking that was all he deserved. But Clara had taught him different. Had taught him that it's never too late to choose light, to choose hope, to choose to care about something beyond your own pain. You just had to be brave enough to open the door when someone knocked. Elias Crow died peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 86. He went to bed after a long day helping Thomas repair a section of fence and simply didn't wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from hard use but full to the end. Clara found him the next morning when she came to make breakfast. She sat beside him for a long time, holding his hand, crying quietly. But underneath the grief was gratitude, for every moment they'd had, for every lesson he'd taught her, for choosing her when he didn't have to. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the prairie he'd loved. The whole county came to the funeral, more people than Elias probably would have wanted, but Clara didn't care. He'd spent too many years isolated and alone. His death would be witnessed, would matter, would be mourned. At the service, Clara stood and spoke. She told the story of that Christmas Eve night, of a child who'd given up hope, and a man who'd forgotten how to care. She told them how they'd saved each other, how one small act of kindness had rippled outward into something neither of them could have imagined. My father used to say that worth isn't measured in money or success or any of the things people usually count, Clara said. It's measured in whether you make the world better or worse, in whether people are glad you were alive. She looked out at the assembled crowd, neighbors, friends, family, people whose lives had been touched by Elias Crow in ways big and small. I'm so glad he was alive, she continued, her voice breaking. I'm so glad he opened his door on a night when most people would have stayed inside where it was warm and safe. Because that choice, that single, simple choice, changed everything. After the funeral, people gathered at the ranch. They shared stories about Elias, about his gruffness and his hidden kindness, about how he'd changed after Clara came into his life. Best thing that ever happened to him, Sheriff Ward said. He was 92 now, bent and gray, but he'd insisted on coming. Best thing that ever happened to both of them. The ranch passed to Clara. She and Daniel talked about selling it, but in the end they couldn't. This was where her life had truly begun, where she'd learned what it meant to be loved unconditionally, where she'd discovered that family wasn't about blood, but about showing up day after day and choosing each other. So they kept it. Hired someone to run the day-to-day operations, but the land stayed in the family. Emma would inherit it someday, and then her children, and on down the line. Clara's story spread over the years. People told it differently depending on who was doing the telling. Some focused on the dramatic rescue, others on the trial, still others on the quiet years of healing that followed. But the core remained the same. A man who'd lost everything found something worth living for. A child who'd been thrown away found someone who saw her worth. They'd saved each other. When Clara was 73, a journalist from Kansas City came to interview her. Wanted to write an article about her work. She'd spent 40 years teaching, had helped hundreds of children learn to read and write and believe in themselves. You've accomplished so much, the journalist said. What are you most proud of? Clara thought about that question for a long time. She could have talked about her teaching career, her children and grandchildren, the foundation she'd started to help foster children. All of it was important. But in the end, there was only one answer. I'm most proud that I knocked, she said. That I didn't give up in that blizzard, that I kept walking until I saw a light and had the courage to ask for help. And your father, what do you think he'd be most proud of? Clara smiled. He'd be proud that he answered, that he chose to care when it would have been easier not to, that he proved you don't have to be perfect to make a difference, you just have to try. The journalist scribbled notes. It's an incredible story, almost hard to believe it really happened. But it did happen. And it keeps happening in different ways to different people. Someone reaches out, someone responds. Lives change. Clara looked out the window at the prairie beyond. That's the only story that matters. Everything else is just details. Years later, when Clara herself was nearing the end, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, someone asked her what she'd learned from it all. She was quiet for a long time, gathering her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. I learned that worth isn't something you earn. It's something you have simply by being alive. I learned that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing that ever happened to me. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer it. She paused, remembering a snow-covered prairie and a warm light in the darkness, and a door opening when she'd thought all doors were closed forever. But most of all, she continued, I learned that it's never too late to choose differently, to choose hope over despair, to choose connection over isolation, to choose to open the door instead of leaving it closed. Even when it's scary? Her great-granddaughter asked. Especially when it's scary. Clara died peacefully that spring, having lived a full and meaningful life. They buried her next to Elias on that same hill overlooking the prairie. Her headstone bore her chosen name, Clara Crow, and beneath it, a simple inscription. She knocked. He answered. Everything changed. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. Children grew up there, learning about the woman who'd survived a blizzard and the man who'd opened his door. The story became family legend, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But at its heart, it remained true. A truth about second chances and chosen family, and the simple fact that one person caring about another person can change everything. Because that's all it takes, really. One door opening, one hand reaching out, one person deciding that another person matters. That's how you save a life. That's how you save your own.